Hi, everybody. This is Mo. So today I'm going to be talking about the one question people always ask me, am I traveling with a Nigerian passport? I think because I travel so often, people are not really sure if I'm traveling with a Nigerian passport. So the first things first is I travel with a Nigerian passport. And in this video, I'm going to talk about how I do it, right? I've been traveling full time for almost 2 years now. I actually cannot believe it's been that long. So throughout this video, I'm just going to talk about how I've done it, how it's worked out for me, and some of the questions that people would typically ask me. Now, I have my phone here just to make sure that, I'm answering the questions that people typically would ask. And then, so let's go. So the first thing here is, what I would say is, if you're traveling with a Nigerian passport, the first thing that needs to happen is there are certain visas you need to get, right? So I would say get the US visa, get the UK visa. The reason for that is because, as you know, the US visa is one of the most respected visas in the world. And it's not just because the US visa, it's because of the process to get the US visa. So a lot of embassies believe that the US embassy themselves would go through a lot of scrutiny for individual visa applicants. So it's kind of like there's already been a check somewhere. People are a lot more comfortable with that process. So if you are applying to another country and you have a US visa on your passport, more likely than not, you will be granted the visa, right? It just increases your chances. Now, another thing I should mention with visas is that there is no hard and fast rule, right? So what would typically happen is people will tell you these are the things that you need to do to increase your chances of getting a visa. But the truth about it is that there's nothing that says for sure that you would get a visa or you'll be rejected. But there are certain things that you can do, right, to ensure that you increase your chances of getting a visa. So again, for me, this was how it happened. So I had a Nigerian passport and I knew that I wanted to travel full time. At the time, I had a UK visa, right? And then I had a visa to Brazil. I had applied for a Schengen visa, but it had expired at the time. And to say that before I started traveling full time, I had always traveled, not as frequently, but there were quite a number of visas on my passport as well. In terms of visas, I have never, actually, that's not true. I've been rejected for a visa just once, and I was 15 or maybe 14. Anyways, I remember I was still in secondary school at the time, and it was a UK visa, and the reason was very vague. I can't really remember. I never appealed, so I just let that go. But in my adult life, I've never been denied a visa. So I don't really have too much experience with that, just generally. But the one thing I would say is there are certain requirements for you to increase your chances of getting a visa. So make sure for every country that you're applying to, look at what their requirements are, right? Look at the immigration rules itself. If they want you to establish that you would not have recourse to public funds, for instance, which is one of the most popular criteria that you get for the UK, then you have to show that you have enough means for sustenance during the time that you're going to be in that country. If they want you to show that you would not jackpot permanently, right? The reason for you going to that country is not for you to run away, right? Then you need to show family, social ties, financial ties to your country of permanent residence. So those kind of things are very important. And it's kind of like, it's just a system. So once you just tick all those boxes, then you can apply for your visa. So now, in terms of like the US visa, for instance, the US visa gives you access to over 20 countries. And I remember that at the time when I had my student US visa, I visited countries like Costa Rica, Mexico, some US territories, that were outside of the US as well. And it was fantastic, right? So the only thing I just needed to present once I got to the airport was my US visa, and it was just stamped, and that was good. So if you're looking to travel full time, or you're looking to be a digital nomad, I would say that the US visa for sure is one of the visas that you should get. Now, the UK visa is also another interesting one. So when I first started traveling, I used my UK visa to enter into a couple of countries. So the first country I landed was Albania. So Albania, Bosnia, North Macedonia, Serbia, well, not Croatia, Montenegro, all of those countries. So the countries in the Baltic region, you can use a US or UK visa to enter into those countries. Now, because you have a Nigerian passport, I would say that you must be very, very specific on you must be very specific on what you know. For instance, I remember that there was a particular border I had gone to. I want to believe it was Bosnia. So Bosnia and Herzegovina. When I got to the border, obviously I'm a woman traveling by myself, a Black woman, that's not a sight that you typically would see in that country. And the immigration officer asked me, said, where are you going? And I was like, I'm going inside. And it was like, why? And I was like, for tourism. So he himself was shocked, right? And then he was like, oh, do you have a visa? And then I presented my UK visa and he was looking at me. But then because I was sure, because I'd done my research and I knew that I could enter into the country with my UK visa, I was very confident. And I said, oh, this is it. Also, another thing you should know is that just because you have a visa doesn't guarantee you entry into a particular country. At the border control, the border officials can actually send you back, right? And they don't have to give you any reason for doing that. That's just something else that I wanted to also just highlight. So I traveled around the Balkans with my UK visa at the time, and it was fine. So definitely, if you have a UK and a US visa combined, you have access to about 25 different countries as a Nigerian. So I'll put all those countries, on the screen so you can see them yourselves and kind of like plot where you want to go to. Now, with the Schengen, I haven't had a Schengen in a while. And when I traveled full-time, throughout, since I started traveling full-time, I've actually not been to the Schengen region. I'm just about to do that Schengen thing this summer, and I'm pretty excited about it. I really want to go to Italy. But anyways, if you want to add Europe to it, definitely you want to get a Schengen visa, right? Now, the thing about a Schengen is why I didn't bother to get it at the time was because I needed to go back to the US or Nigeria, and it wasn't just working for me. So I was just like, see, that's not something I want to do. And also, the Schengen visas are typically short term. So with the with the UK visa, for instance, you can get like a long-term type visa, 6 months to 2 years. And then with the US visa at the time, it was 2 years, but I believe that the US is now giving 5 years, right? So it's long-term visas. But with Schengen, it's typically a couple of weeks, especially if you're just applying for the first time. And then so for me, it just didn't make any sense going all the way to Nigeria, get a short-term visa, and it was just no priority for me, right? So I just didn't do it. So one thing that was very helpful to me is getting a residency in a country that was accessible. And the country I chose was the UAE. And that's for a couple of reasons, right? I was primarily in Dubai, and Dubai is about 7 hours from 3/4 of the world. And then the connectivity that Emirates as an airline has is just unmatched, right? And the service was just great. And Dubai is a nice place. Now, I had to get a residency in Dubai for me to be able to apply for visas from Dubai. And then if you want me to talk about that, how I got the residency, what the process was, and what that looked like, just leave a comment below and I'll be happy to share, of course. But yeah, for me, I just think that was a very, very good decision for me. I also really like Emirates, and I had a lot of points with the Emirates reward program. So it just made a lot of sense for me. So every time I traveled, I would always connect through Dubai, and it was just fantastic. My tickets were also relatively cheaper than if I was traveling from the US or traveling from Nigeria. So one of the things I'll also say is if you are going to be a digital nomad and you want to visit a particular region, one of the things I would advise is that you get a residency in a somewhat accessible place. And the good thing about it is a lot of countries are opening up digital nomad residencies. That's another thing that if you want me to talk about, I can definitely talk about. I spend a lot of my time researching. So you have Croatia, you have Portugal. So imagine if you get a digital nomad residency in Portugal, then you can travel around Europe as a digital nomad, right? And it's just a lot easier than, say, traveling from Nigeria, for instance, or if you were like me, traveling from the States, right? So that's pretty much it on that. So the real elephant in the room, let's talk about, because I'm Nigerian and I love Nigeria. Like I really love my continent. I do think that Africa as a continent, right, is very beautiful, very diverse. Love the food, love the people, love the hospitality. Now, you'll notice that in all of the countries, and I'll just put all of the countries I visited in my 1 year on the screen here. So I'll put all the countries here on the screen, and you'll see that there are very few African countries on the list. Now, it was not by design, really and truly. I want to travel around the continent, but there are two things that stops me from doing that, right? Number one is that traveling around the continent is just expensive. We don't have good connectivity around. I remember there was a friend of mine that was trying to go to Cote d'Ivoire from somewhere within Africa, right? And he had to go all the way to France or something ridiculous, and then had to now connect back to Cote d'Ivoire. And I was like, this makes no sense whatsoever. That ticket was still cheaper than if he had flown, internally within the continent. And for me, that's just unacceptable. When I was in Kenya, I actually was primed to go to Dakar, and I saw the price of my ticket, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I would go to Europe and come back twice on the price of what it would have cost me to go from Kenya to Dakar. And when you think about it in that way, it was just impossible. Another thing also is that we don't have any other connectivity aside air. What do I mean by that? Now, there are other continents, like for instance, within Europe, right? So you can go on the train. And I remember that when I was in the Balkans, I was driving. So I drove from Albania to Montenegro to Bosnia and Herzegovina because the road connectivity just existed, right? It was possible for me to do that. Again, that's not really something that you can do aside from the, from the states of the road. Then also, I guess, people have certain concerns about security, which is not out of place. So again, those are things that, again, there was no other alternative, right? It was like, if I wanted to fly across the continent, then I needed to fly. If I wanted to go around the continent, then I needed to fly across. So for me, it just looks really expensive, and I just didn't do it. But if I was going to do it differently, what I would have done is I would have, and if for anybody who's considering a Africa-wide travel, I would batch it according to region. So if I'm in Southern Africa for a couple of months, then I will go to the countries in Southern Africa. Then if I'm in the East Africa region, then I would do, the countries in East Africa. Usually for those regional connectivities, you have better luck and maybe cheaper tickets, right? So that's the reason why I didn't really go around the continent. So going forward, I plan to visit a lot more African countries. And then, I would share, of course. Now, for the ones that I did visit, and I can talk about them really briefly, I don't know why we need visas across the continent, right? To me, it's just something that I don't understand. My colleagues that have American or European passports, I remember when I was working for an NGO in New York, and then we used to do a lot of work on the continent, and I couldn't just travel to my own continent, right? My colleagues that had American passports and had European passports, they had visa on arrival to countries in Africa, where me as a Nigerian passport holder, I needed to get visas. It was something that I couldn't just wrap my mind around. My colleagues themselves could not wrap their mind around it, because it was like, what do you mean you can't go? So basically there's an assignment in Kenya, and they're like, oh, you can't. I'm like, oh, I need to apply for a visa, and they're like, really? So again, that's also another thing that I think a lot more people should talk about, because it just doesn't make any sense. Now, for the ones I went to for Kenya, I did, at the time, Kenya was granting Nigerians visa on arrival. And the last I heard, that's not happening anymore. Now you have to apply for the visas online, and then you get it after a couple of days. The other country I went to was Seychelles, and then Seychelles was visa on arrival, and you had to pay, I believe it was about $20 at the time. I'm not really sure. Another country in Africa that I had to get a visa for was Morocco. I remember Morocco was a bit, it was kind of like a bit, because I had a wedding and it was very tight. So I had to pay a premium in order for me to be able to get a visa to Morocco. I remember that I had to pay an equivalent of 250,000 naira. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense for a visa, within the continent. Another visa I had to get at the time was, so I did Mauritius as well, but Mauritius is visa on arrival. So for me, because I didn't want to stress about visas, I mostly just did African countries that were either visa on arrival or e-visas. One place that I haven't been to, and most people don't believe, is South Africa. I've not been to South Africa yet. And the reason I've not been to South Africa is because for the longest of time, it was just a hassle for us in Nigerian to get a South African visa. I hear that it's a lot more straightforward and you can do it online, but who knows, maybe, maybe not. I did try to apply, and up until today, I don't have my e-visa yet. So you see, so when I get my e-visa, I will let you know how it works out. But again, I haven't been to South Africa just because of the visa restriction. And this is not my own personal experience, but a friend of mine was slated to go to Zambia for work. And it was supposed to be an e-visa, and he was rejected 3 times for that particular visa. He's a Nigerian passport holder. He was rejected 3 times for an e-visa, and just didn't make any sense. So I don't know who needs to hear this. I don't know where we need to take this advocacy to, but I do think that travel within Africa can be a lot more accessible for Africans generally. So, I mean, another region that I haven't explored as much as I would like is Southeast Asia specifically. Now, in terms of Asia, I've been to India, which I totally loved. I remember I went to India for a wedding. I really loved it because I went to a place called Kerala, Trivandrum, and it just reminded me of Lagos. Southern Indian food is delicious. I love, that part of the world so much. But again, I've not been to Indonesia, for instance, because the visa requirements I find them ridiculous, right? I don't need to prove that I'm not a drug peddler before you grant me a visa. And again, even the requirements for visas generally are very invasive, right? So for you to now ask me an extra step for me to go and prove that I'm not a drug dealer, I'm not going to do it. I don't care how many swings there are in Bali. Do you understand? I'm going to swing somewhere else, right? So it's not something I am interested in doing. So if you see me in again, Bali is very beautiful. If you see me there, just know that it's either, maybe I have a second passport, which I'll talk about later, or they've uplifted that requirement, or I didn't have to do that, but I'm not going to do that. So for me, any country that just says, oh, NDLEA certificates, XXX, I'm just not interested, right? And the good thing about it is that I feel like a lot more Nigerians should have a more open mind, because there are many countries that I wouldn't have discovered otherwise. A lot of people are going to Lebanon now, but at the time when I was going to Lebanon, a lot of people would ask me and say, what are you going to go and do there? Is the country now not at war? But Lebanon is one of the most beautiful countries in the world, right? So I feel like if there are places that are telling you don't come and spend your tourism dollars, that's fine. But look for other places that actually want you to come and spend your tourism dollars there, right? So for me, but going forward, I've looked at countries like Korea, some countries like Japan. Those are countries that I want to visit. Vietnam, for instance, as well, and Singapore. So those are the countries that are, on my list in Asia just generally. But any country that tells me that I need to prove that I'm not a drug dealer, I'm sorry. That's not going to happen. I'm just not doing it, just out of principle. Now, in conclusion, just kind of like talking about, if traveling with a Nigerian passport is so stressful, why don't I get a second passport? So I have thought about this a number of times. It's something that I have at some point saved up towards, but again, I actually do like being Nigerian, as crazy as it sounds, right? I do like it. I like having an Nigerian passport. So I think a part of me really doesn't want to let go of that passport. I know that you can hold dual passports and things like that, but I think I'm also speaking from a position of privilege, in the sense that I have traveled so many times that it's very unlikely that I would ever be rejected for a visa. And even if I am, I can always just dispute it. You get what I mean? But for people who are just starting their journeys, just generally, your life is going to be a lot easier if you have a second passport, right? So I will tell you, if you're just starting and you have the time, there are countries that you can go get residencies, and then you can actually get, a passport after a couple of years, right? So Canada is one of them. Even the US is one of them. So it depends on how you want to do it. But me, for instance, I can't really see myself sitting down in one place for 5 years because I want to get a passport. Now, there are other passports that you can get, all of this, islands and things like that. Another thing I've now noticed is that even when you own the passports from those countries, they've started discriminating against people who were born in certain countries. Like I saw one visa application that said, oh, you know what? Yes, if you have a passport from one of the Caribbean islands, I don't remember a country per se, and you were born in Nigeria, Pakistan, listed some other countries, then you don't have visa on arrival. And I was like, oh my God. So that's when I went to my passport, and I found out that on your passport, no matter the passport you have, if you get a second passport, the country that you were born is always still going to be there. So if I get a passport from Barbados, or I get a passport from St. Kitts. So if I get a passport from St. Kitts, right, it's still going to show I was born in Nigeria. And I've started seeing like some subtle kind of like discrimination for people who are born in certain countries. And I'm like, why do I want to do this? So again, as of today, and as of making this video, it's really not in my plans, but who knows, it might change. But again, like I said, if you are in a position where you can, then please just do it, because it just makes your life generally a lot easier. And another thing I just wanted to say is, as a Nigerian passport holder, you're going to be a bit frustrated sometimes when you travel. They will tell you that it's random security check, but it's not. You notice that the only people that are stopping are people, they are stopping at people who look like you or have your kind of passport. And I know it's a frustrating experience, but I would still encourage you to do two things. Number one, don't take it personal. Number two, talk about it. I believe that bad behavior generally just gets worse in silence, right? And people are like, oh, they don't want to rock the boat. But that's the only way it gets better, right? Like, people need to push back against this thing. So I'm not saying that at the airport you should fight. Don't fight at the airports when you leave the country, and don't fight when you're in the country. When you leave the country, then you can say whatever you want to say, right? Make it respectful, but let them know that this was unacceptable behavior. So I do think that that's also something that we as Nigerian passport holders have to begin to demand, that sort of respect when we travel. People shouldn't just treat us anyhow, right? And then just generally, I live, breathe, travel. It's one of my favorite things to do. So if you have any questions, particularly on traveling with a Nigerian passport, please leave it in the comments. I'll be happy to answer you. And thank you for watching. Bye.